Okay, today for task 10, March 23rd, Monday, March 23rd, for task 10, we are going to read Starry Messenger by Peter Sis. So today we do have new vocabulary words, and those are going to be universe, tradition, observe, observations, publish, and inspired. Those are in addition to the other days 1 through 7 that we have already been adding to and talking about with revolve, orbit, rotation, spinning, axis, tilt, all of those things that helped us understand the Earth's rotation and revolution around the sun. During our task today, during our read aloud, we would have normally in class been doing a timeline. So I have already created that timeline, and as we read those parts in the book, I'm going to reveal to you what needs to be on that timeline. So as a family, you all can create this, recreate the same timeline, or you can just look at the video and pause it and kind of glance at what those things are, because you are going to have task 10 to do independently, but this is what we would have done as a class while we read the story. So, Starry Messenger. This is a book depicting the life of a famous scientist, mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, and physicist. For hundreds of years, most people thought the Earth was the center of the universe, and the sun and the moon and all the other planets revolved around it. They did not doubt or wonder if this was true. They just followed tradition. Then one man looked at the sky and wondered, what if things are not as everybody believes them to be? Maybe the Earth and the other planets move around the sun. He wrote down his observations, but he did not talk about them, and he did not publish them for a long, long time. He knew he would not prove they were true. It would take someone else to do that. In those days, Italy was a country where many great artists, writers, musicians, and scholars lived. In the city of Pisa, a little boy was born with stars in his eyes. His parents named him Galileo. Galileo thrived and he grew. In many ways, he was like any other healthy child, but he was more curious than most, and stars were always on his mind. So, I forgot about our timeline, but so far on our timeline, we have at the beginning of the book that people thought the sun revolved around the earth. Woo. Then we have Copernicus thought the earth revolved around the sun. And Galileo was born. And over on the side, they have notes that are actually from Galileo's notebooks. So that's his handwriting, and they pulled those out. They don't necessarily go with our reading, but it is kind of cool just to see. Galileo studied mathematics and physics and turned out to be a very bright young man who entertained and amused people with his brilliant experiments and observations. Galileo is our star, the people would say. Then one day, Galileo heard about a new instrument for seeing things far, far away. He figured out how it worked and made one for himself. Then he turned it to the sky. So this would be the telescope. So the next thing on our timeline is the telescope is invented. You can see the different telescopes. He made one for himself, and he aimed it at the sky to see what all he could notice. Night after night, he gazed through his telescope and wrote down everything he observed. Then he published his observations in a book which he called the Starry Messenger. So there's an excerpt from the Starry Messenger. And these are all notes from his actual observations as well. Galileo was amazed by what he could see with his telescope. People read Galileo's book and they became inspired. He made maps of the heavens and dedicated the 4 newly discovered stars of Jupiter to his patron and ruler, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo II. Soon Galileo was famous. More and more people celebrated the stars, and they celebrated Galileo and his discoveries with statues and parades and spectacular events. His fame grew, and the celebrations became extravaganzas. But now the church began to worry. Galileo had become too popular. By upholding the idea that the earth was not the center of the universe, he had gone against the Bible and everything the ancient philosophers had taught. He had gone against the church. Galileo was ordered to stop believing what he could see with his own 2 eyes. He was summoned to appear before the highest ruler of the land, the Pope. Galileo was afraid. He knew that people had suffered terrible torture and punishment for not following tradition. It could happen to him. He was tried in the Pope's court, and everyone could see that the stars had left his eyes. Galileo was condemned to spend the rest of his life locked in his house under guard, but he still had stars on his mind, and no one could keep him from thinking about the wonders of the skies and the mysteries of the universe. And even when he went blind, no one could keep him from passing his ideas along to others until the day he died. But still, the ideas lived on. Finally, more than 300 years later, the leaders of the very church that had punished Galileo pardoned him, and they admitted that he was probably, in fact, surely, and absolutely right. So I'm bad at multitasking. So on our timeline, after the telescope was invented, people celebrated Galileo and his observations. The church told Galileo to stop believing his ideas. And finally, the church changed its mind and said Galileo was right. So if you need to freeze the video, you can see the entire timeline and illustrations. You can create one at home, or you can just study this one. And check out the next video to hear more about your independent task.